Hey everyone, before we dive into this epic sci-fi tale, don't forget to hit that like button, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more insane HFY stories. You won't want to miss what happens next in this galaxy where the deadliest predator isn't always the enemy. Now let's get into it. The cold void of space stretched endlessly as Captain Rock Varos adjusted his armor and scanned the holomap projected in front of him. His crew of seasoned mercenaries moved silently around the transport, each member a walking testament to years of bloodshed and survival. Rock's eyes narrowed as he traced the path marked on the map, the remote wilderness of a moon classified as restricted by the Galactic Syndicate. According to their latest contract, something valuable had escaped from a high-security lab. Something dangerous. Rock exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of another impossible mission settle over him. "Team," he said, his voice calm but carrying authority, "we're not just going after a creature. We're retrieving the most lethal predator in known space, and it's been engineered to kill anything in its path." He paused, letting the silence underscore the danger. "We go in alive. We leave alive. Everything else is irrelevant." Jean Cor, Rock's second-in-command, leaned against the console, his 6 mechanical limbs flexing in anticipation. "Alive." Jean scoffed, a hint of derision in his voice. "Captain, we both know the Syndicate doesn't care about alive. They want it contained. Or destroyed. Whoever designed this operation clearly has a death wish." Rock ignored the jab. He had faced the universe's deadliest predators before, but something about this mission felt different. The lab files described the creature as a Zarkul Apex, a towering, 6-limbed hunter with adaptive armor and intelligence rivaling the galaxy's most advanced AI. It had been bred for combat, tested in simulations that crushed entire planetary squads, and now, somehow, it had escaped. And somewhere in its path, a human child had survived a shuttle crash. The files called the child an afterthought. Rock wasn't so sure. Elias Ward, a young human scout assigned temporarily to the team as a tracker, frowned as he studied the environmental data. "Captain, I don't think the child survived the crash," he said quietly. His voice trembled slightly, not from fear of the apex but from the hopelessness of the scenario. "This moon, it's nothing but jagged cliffs and toxic flora. No shelter, no immediate water sources. Survival odds are low." "Then we'll find them," Rock replied, his gaze steely. "And if the child is dead, we'll at least understand why the Syndicate wants this mission so badly. Either way, we follow orders and take the apex alive." As the transport descended through the dense atmosphere, tension coiled around the team like a living thing. Sensors pinged erratically, signs of recent movement, massive weight displaced in unnatural ways. Rock's brow furrowed. "These aren't ordinary tracks," he muttered. "They're calculated. Almost deliberate." Jean stepped closer, inspecting the display. "Deliberate? You mean the creature is leading us somewhere?" "Or waiting," Rock said, his instincts prickling. He had tracked apex predators before. He had studied their patterns. They did not wait. They hunted. And yet, every sign here suggested something unprecedented. The predator had circled, layered its tracks, and avoided killing anything that might give it away. Not even scavenger corpses were found along the path. The team reached the crash site under a dull, blood-red sky. Twisted metal littered the jagged terrain, and scorched marks scorched the soil where the shuttle had burned. The air smelled of burnt fuel and ozone. Elias approached cautiously, scanning with a portable detector. "Alive," he whispered, pointing to a faint pulse. "One. Weak but steady." Rock crouched beside him, reading the device. His stomach clenched. "A human," he said. "And something else." He waved to the scanner, which flickered with another signal, massive, powerful, and moving with deliberate precision. "That's no human." The mercenaries exchanged uneasy glances. Jin's fingers twitched over the controls. "It's too big to be a typical apex. Something about it, it's protecting that child." Rock's eyes darkened. "Protecting? Apex predators don't protect anything. They don't care for humans, for children, for anyone. Their only instinct is to kill or survive. If this one is guarding the child, then this mission just became unpredictable." He stood and signaled the team forward. "We proceed carefully. Keep your weapons ready, but understand this. Whatever we find, it's not just a creature. Something more. Something the Syndicate never expected." The wind howled across the jagged cliffs, carrying with it a strange, almost melodic hum, low and resonant. The team froze. Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. The sound was alive, purposeful, and oddly comforting. Rock's voice cut through the tension. "Stay sharp. Observe. And remember, we are the hunters today, but nothing here behaves like the prey we've known. He glanced once more at the faint pulse reading and the massive signature beside it. Whatever's out there, it's not going to be easy. But we'll find the child. And we'll find the apex. That's our mission. A sudden rustle echoed from the shadows of the jagged rocks. All movement froze. Then, without warning, the massive form of the predator appeared, a silhouette against the scarlet sky. It didn't attack. It didn't roar. It simply watched, muscles coiled, eyes reflecting intelligence and something else, an unmistakable protective intent. Rock swallowed hard. He had stared down death countless times, faced horrors no one would believe. But nothing in his career had prepared him for this. The deadliest predator in the galaxy standing between him and a human child, waiting. Not hunting. Waiting. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint heartbeat of the child and the soft, deliberate breathing of the apex. Rock gestured for his team to hold position. Every mercenary understood, without words, that this encounter would define the rest of their lives. The contract, the syndicate, even their own fears, they were secondary. What mattered now was what stood before them. A creature who chose to protect the smallest life in the universe. And just like that, the mission changed forever. Lieutenant Elias Ward had replayed the crash 100 times in his head, and each time it felt like a jagged fragment of a nightmare he couldn't fully piece together. One moment the shuttle had been gliding through the atmosphere on a routine descent, the next it was coughing smoke and spiraling into the forest canopy. He and the boy, Milo, had survived only because the aft cabin had sheared off before the explosion swallowed the front half. When Elias regained consciousness, the wreck was still burning, and a towering silhouette stood in the flickering light, framed by drifting ash. At first, he'd been certain death had finally come wearing the shape of a legend. The Zarkul apex was every horror briefing come to life. Obsidian skin etched with ridges, for primary limbs braced for motion, two secondary limbs tucked close like blades waiting to unfold. Its eyes glowed like silent suns. Elias had drawn his sidearm with shaking fingers, knowing damn well it wouldn't do a thing. The creature didn't move toward him. Instead, it tilted its head, listening to something over his ragged breathing. When Milo whimpered from beneath a section of broken hull, the apex shifted its weight and lowered itself as though studying the tiny sound. Elias dragged himself toward the boy, expecting the beast to strike. Instead, it stepped back, allowing him to pull Milo from the debris. The child's face was streaked with soot and tears, his small hands clutching Elias's sleeve as if the world might fall apart again. When Elias looked up, the apex was gone, vanished into the trees without so much as a snapped branch. He told himself that was the end of it, that the creature would return once they were too weak to fight. But it didn't come back until nightfall, and when it did, it carried food. That first night had been the longest of Elias's life. He waited for the inevitable attack, keeping Milo close while the fire sputtered in their makeshift shelter. The apex appeared at the edge of the shadows, placing a skinned animal beside the dying flames. The gesture was deliberate, almost restrained. Milo, too exhausted to be afraid, whispered, "Is it helping us?" Elias didn't answer. He simply watched as the creature settled itself at a distance, curling its long limbs around its bulk, eyes fixed on the forest as though standing guard. Days turned into a precarious rhythm. When Elias scavenged for tools, the apex shadowed him without interfering. When Milo cried, the creature emitted a low vibration that soothed the child almost instantly. It responded to gestures, learned patterns, and watched everything with an intelligence that unsettled Elias more than its claws ever could. The more time he spent observing it, the more he suspected it wasn't acting on instinct alone. Its movements were too measured, its decisions too purposeful. Something had shaped it, taught it, or broken it in ways he didn't yet understand. Milo named it Coda on the fourth day, pressing the syllables together with childish confidence. The apex responded to the sound almost immediately, lifting its head and blinking in a slow, deliberate motion that resembled acknowledgement. Elias tried to correct the boy, tried to remind him that names implied familiarity, and familiarity implied safety they did not have. But Milo wasn't listening. He tugged on Elias's sleeve and pointed, whispering, "Coda's watching the sky." And sure enough, the creature was sitting upright, gaze tracking the distant rumble of an engine. It took Elias a moment to realize what that meant. Rescue or threat, either way someone was coming. He ushered Milo back into the shelter and watched Coda transition from calm guardian to silent predator in a heartbeat. The creature positioned itself between the shelter and the direction of the incoming sound, its body coiled low, limbs tensed. Yet there was no hunger in its posture. It wasn't preparing for a hunt. It was preparing for a defense. A chill crawled up Elias's spine as he understood the implications. The apex wasn't protecting itself. It was protecting them. For hours the forest remained unervingly quiet, the sound of engines fading into the distance without any sign of landing craft. Elias tried to convince himself he had imagined it, but the apex didn't relax. It paced the perimeter around their shelter, occasionally pausing to listen, nostrils flaring as though catching scents beyond human perception. Milo fell asleep with his head on Elias's leg, trusting the creature without hesitation. Elias wished he shared that trust. Night draped over the clearing. Leaves rustled, not from wind but from deliberate movement. Koda's head snapped up, and its pupils contracted to razor-thin slits. Elias held his breath. In the darkness beyond the fire's glow, metal clicked. A boot, a weapon, something undeniably artificial. A distant voice murmured something unintelligible. Another replied, lower and harder. Elias recognized the cadence immediately. Mercenaries? He didn't know whether they were here for a rescue or a retrieval, but he'd seen enough border skirmishes to know the difference between soldiers and hired guns. And the voices outside belonged to men who didn't come to negotiate. Koda moved closer, lowering its massive frame until its back nearly brushed the ground. Elias felt the air tighten around them as the creature positioned itself directly in front of the shelter entrance. Milo slept on, unaware of how close the danger crept. Elias reached for his weapon, not because he thought he could fight off a mercenary team, but because he refused to let them take the boy without resistance. Koda glanced back at him, its gaze locking onto his in a moment of eerie understanding. The creature wasn't asking permission. It was acknowledging partnership. Branches snapped under heavy boots, and a beam of artificial light cut through the trees. Elias shielded Milo with his body. Koda inhaled deeply, every muscle taut, ready to strike. But the mercenaries stopped just beyond the clearing. Their light faltered. One voice whispered, "Why is it guarding them?" Another answered with disbelief edging into fear. Elias couldn't see their faces, but he heard hesitation in every breath they took. The apex didn't move. It simply waited, still as a sculpted warning. The mercenaries retreated into the dark, their comms crackling with confused reports. Elias exhaled shakily, realizing the standoff had ended without a single shot fired. But he also knew this was only the beginning. Someone out there wanted the creature. Someone else might want a survivor silenced. And neither side would give up easily now that they knew where to look. Koda settled beside the shelter, eyes glowing faintly through the night. Elias lay awake, listening to Milo breathe, knowing the fragile safety they'd carved out was about to shatter. The forest held its breath with him, as though waiting for dawn to reveal how the next move would be played. Captain Rock Varos had led contract teams into war zones that chewed up dropships and spat out bones, but nothing unsettled him like the sight before him now. Through the magnified lens of his visor, the Zarkul apex curled protectively around a sleeping human child, its enormous frame acting as a living barricade between the boy and the world. Apexes did not protect. They annihilated. Yet this one lay as still as carved obsidian, its breaths measured, its eyes half-lidded in a posture Rock's instincts interpreted, absurdly, as vigilance rather than aggression. Jean Cor crouched beside him, his armor rasping softly as he shifted. "Captain, there's no scenario where that thing doesn't slaughter them the moment it gets hungry. We've seen what it does to armored recon mechs." Rock didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the child's hand, tiny, soot-smeared, resting against the creature's plated hide as though it were nothing more dangerous than a loyal beast. The conflict inside him sharpened. Their contract demanded retrieval of the apex alive at all costs, with the implicit understanding that all costs included innocent collateral. But mercenaries had their own code, thin as it was, and something in the scene below violated it so profoundly that Rock felt physically anchored to the forest floor. A flicker of movement caught his eye. A man emerged from the shelter, lean, wounded, but alert. Human military, judging by the stance and the way he carried his battered sidearm. When he stepped into the faint morning light, his voice carried with restrained desperation. "Stop. Don't fire. The creature isn't attacking us, it's defending the boy." Jin swore under his breath. "He's delusional. Apexes don't defend. They use bait." The apex lifted its head then, slow and deliberate as though acknowledging the arrival of new players. Rock felt a prickle run up his spine. Its gaze held no rage, no mindless hunger, only calculation. It shifted slightly to provide greater cover for the child, its limbs positioned with almost parental precision. Elias Ward spotted the mercenary squad perched on the slope and lifted a hand, not surrender but warning. If you shoot, you'll kill the kid. And it will kill you. Not because it wants to. Because you're a threat to him. Rock dropped from the ridge and approached the clearing with deliberate calm, ignoring Zhen's hissed protest. The apex watched him with predatory stillness, but it didn't rise. The child snored softly against its side, blissfully unaware of the suffocating tension threading the air. Rock halted several paces from Elias, noting the man's exhaustion carved into the angles of his face. "Lieutenant Ward," he said, recognizing the military insignia half burned into the man's jacket. "We're here for the apex. You and the child were not part of the contract." "That's your problem," Elias replied, steady despite his visible wounds. "Because that creature won't let you take him." Zhen and the others fanned out, forming a semicircle. Rock raised a hand before they could advance further. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to weigh the creature's power against his team's chances, but another instinct, a quieter, older one, urged caution. Something unprecedented was unfolding here. "Why is it protecting the boy?" Rock asked. Elias exhaled shakily. "Because he saved it. And it saved him. Whatever they did to it in that lab, the creature's not just a weapon. It's bonded to him." The apex shifted at the sound of Elias's voice, one luminous eye fixing on the lieutenant. Milo stirred in his sleep, mumbling unintelligibly. In response, the creature emitted a gentle vibration, almost soothing. For a moment no one spoke. Then, without warning, a mercenary at the far end of the formation flinched at a snapping twig and fired a reflexive shot. The crack echoed like a whip. The bullet ricocheted off the apex's armored shoulder. The reaction was instantaneous. The creature surged to its feet with a roar that seemed to shake the roots of the world. Rock barely processed the blur of movement before the apex had vaulted across the clearing, pinning the shooter beneath one clawed limb. Its jaws opened wide enough to sever a torso in a single motion. "Milo!" Elias shouted, voice cracking. The child awoke with a terrified cry. The sound froze the beast mid-strike as if the air itself had turned to glass around it. The apex twisted, its focus snapping back to the boy. In that moment of hesitation, Rock seized the opportunity. "Stand down," he roared, not to his men but to the monster. Everyone stared at him as though he'd lost his mind. Yet the apex held still, its chest rising in quick, ragged breaths. Slowly, almost reluctantly, it released the pinned mercenary and returned to Milo's side, lowering itself until the child could cling to its hide. Rock holstered his weapon. Zhen stared at him in disbelief. "Captain, this is madness. The syndicate wants that thing alive. If we don't bring it in..." A sharp whine sliced through the treetops. A surveillance drone descended, scanning the clearing with cold precision. The syndicate insignia gleamed across its chassis as a synthesized voice crackled to life. "Mercenary Unit Veros 17, cease interference. Proceed with primary objective. Terminate civilian witnesses." Milo buried his face in the apex's shoulder. Elias raised his gun, hopeless but defiant. And Rock made his choice. He lifted his rifle and shot the drone out of the air. The forest held its breath as the wreckage smoldered. Zhen stared at him, stunned. "Rock, what did you just do?" Rock felt the weight of his decision settle like armor around him. "I did what every one of you should be doing right now. Look at them." He pointed toward the child curled against the apex. "That creature isn't the threat here." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The syndicate would send more than a drone next time. And when they did, Rock knew exactly which side he was standing on. The apex lifted its head, eyes reflecting the faint morning light. For the first time, Rock felt as though the creature truly saw him. Not as prey, not as an enemy, but as something approaching an ally. The syndicate strike team arrived with all the subtlety of a planetary bombardment. The forest trembled under the weighted cadence of armored boots, and the sky split with the descending roar of a gunship's engines. Rock had expected retaliation, but the speed and precision of the response told him everything he needed to know. The syndicate wanted the apex back, and they didn't give a damn who died to achieve it. The revelation didn't surprise him. The intensity of their mobilization did. Elias crouched beside Milo while Coda prowled the perimeter of their hastily fortified clearing, every motion charged with coiled potential. The apex's instincts had shifted again, this time from guardian to something sharper, almost tactical. Rock watched it analyze approach vectors with unsettling intelligence, occasionally glancing at Milo as though calibrating its next decision on the boy's safety. Zhen completed the last of the tripwire placements and jogged to Rock's side, breath fogging faintly in the cold air. "Captain, we're outnumbered and outgunned. These aren't freelancers, they're syndicate eliminators. They're trained to wipe out entire villages. And they brought enough gear to cage a titan." Rock considered the forest canopy swaying under the gust of the descending gunship. "Then we don't give them a clean battlefield. We make them bleed for every step." Elias shifted Milo behind a fallen trunk. "What exactly is your plan?" "Survive," Rock said simply. "And keep them away from the boy and the creature. They want both. We can't allow either." The first assault wave emerged through the undergrowth, black armor glinting like insect carapace. Their formation was flawless, silent, synchronized, merciless. Coda responded instantly, rising to its full height, muscles rippling under its armored hide. The air hummed with tension as it stepped between the strike team and the humans, its throat vibrating with a low, resonant growl that sent leaves shuddering from the branches overhead. The eliminators opened fire without warning. Bolts of charged plasma sizzled through the air, carving incandescent paths across the clearing. Rock's team returned fire, retreating into the trenches they dug minutes before. Zhen triggered the first of the explosives, sending a spray of dirt and shrapnel into the advancing line. The impact staggered them but didn't halt their approach. Coda, however, stopped them cold. The apex moved with violent elegance, weaving through the bolts with fluid, predatory grace. It struck the first trooper like a hammer, smashing him into a tree so hard the armor buckled around his torso. Another swung a shock baton. Coda seized the weapon and snapped it in half as though breaking a twig. Every strike it delivered was precise, every movement guided by purpose rather than rage. Elias watched in stunned awe. Rock watched with grim affirmation. The creature wasn't out of control, it was choosing who to kill. But the syndicate had come prepared. From the shadows behind the first wave, a towering figure stepped forward. Its armor was reinforced with layered kinetic plates, each inscribed with circuitry attuned to apex physiology. In its hands crackled a pair of shock tridents, tools built specifically for subduing creatures like Coda. The Eliminator Commander. Rock cursed under his breath. They're going for capture. The commander lunged, spinning one trident in a sweeping arc. Coda dodged, but the second trident struck its flank, releasing a burst of violet energy that rippled across the creature's body. Coda roared in pain, a raw, desperate sound that rattled Elias to his core. Milo cried out, and the apex staggered toward him despite the electricity crawling across its limbs. Elias ran forward before Rock could stop him. "Coda down. Stay with me." The apex obeyed, collapsing beside the boy as its limbs twitched uncontrollably. Seeing the creature subdued ignited something feral in Elias's eyes. He turned and fired on the commander with deliberate precision. Rock joined him, followed by Zhen and the remaining mercenaries. For a brief moment, the clearing erupted in unified defiance. But the commander activated a flare that bathed the battlefield in blinding white light. Reinforcements surged forward under its cover, seizing Coda with magnetic clamps designed to bind each limb. The apex fought, but its muscles betrayed it, convulsing under the lingering effects of the shock tridents. Milo screamed as the soldiers dragged the creature toward the gunship, its eyes fixed helplessly on the child. "Rock!" Elias shouted, voice cracking with raw panic. "They're taking him." Rock didn't hesitate. He sprinted through the dissolving flare, firing at the clamp's hinges, trying to free the creature even as more troops swarmed around him. Zhen hurled a thermal charge that forced the eliminators to retreat a few steps, but not enough. Coda was lifted onto a grav sled, its body slamming helplessly against the restraints as it strained toward Milo. Elias reached the edge of the clearing, chest heaving as he watched the apex being hoisted aboard the gunship. Rage and helplessness twisted inside him, and Rock recognized the look. He'd seen it in men who'd lost brothers on the battlefield. The gunship's engines flared, scorching the earth. The commander shouted an order and the craft began to rise. Rock caught Elias by the arm. "We can't stop them now." Elias's voice broke. "They'll kill it. Or worse." Rock didn't deny it. He simply tightened his grip. "Then we get it back. And we make them regret ever landing on this moon." The gunship vanished above the canopy, leaving behind scorched ground, shattered trees, and the echo of Milo's quiet sobs. Coda was gone but not lost. Not yet. Rock looked at his remaining team, battered, furious, and united by a choice none of them could take back. "We regroup. We track the ship. And we take the apex back from the monsters who think they own it." Elias nodded, resolve hardening like steel across his features. Milo wiped his eyes and whispered into the silence, as though Coda could somehow still hear him. "We're coming for you. And with that vow anchoring them all, Rock led the survivors into the forest, already planning the rescue. None of them could afford to fail. The gunship hung in the shadowed canyon like a beast waiting to devour its prey. Rock Varos crouched behind a jagged outcrop, scanning the transport with a mixture of strategy and suppressed fury. Coda was inside, bound by the syndicate's experimental restraints, and Milo's voice had barely left Elias's lips before the boy had scrambled into Rock's arms. The human child, small and trembling, looked to the towering mercenary with unspoken trust, and Rock felt a surge of responsibility he hadn't experienced since losing his first unit to a trap on Cygnus Prime. Failure was not an option. Elias's eyes flicked toward the gunship, calculating the layers of protection around the apex. They've engineered the restraints to counter every muscle movement, he muttered. If they fire those energy clamps fully, it'll paralyze him. He won't even be able to defend Milo. Jean Cor loaded the last of his thermal charges, a grim smile crossing his features. We've taken worse odds, Captain. Let's give them something to remember. His confidence was contagious, and Rock felt it solidify the resolve in his chest. They weren't just soldiers, they were the last line between Milo and death and between Coda and captivity. The plan was audacious. Elias would create a diversion, drawing attention to the canyon edge while Rock and Jean maneuvered to board the gunship from below. Every step had to be precise. A single misfire could kill the child or trigger the apex's restraints permanently. But when the first energy pulse shot across the canyon, sizzling against the stone, there was no turning back. Coda thrashed inside, claws scraping against the reinforced bindings, growls vibrating the hull, each one a warning and a plea at once. Elias stepped out from cover, weapon raised but angled to avoid lethal force. His voice echoed, steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. Hey, over here. You're not going to get what you want. The mercenaries' practiced precision shattered. The syndicate troops turned toward the apparent threat. In that fraction of time, Rock and Jean surged from below, their grappling hooks securing them to the hull with practiced ease. Inside, Coda's massive frame strained against the energy clamps. The apex's eyes flicked to the hatch opening, nostrils flaring as if recognizing the scent of allies. Milo's cry pierced the chamber, small but potent, and the creature's roar answered back, shattering the silence with raw, unfiltered fury. The restraints pulsed under its strength, but the sound alone was enough to make the nearest guards falter. Rock's blade cut through the first layer of plasma shielding, sparks scattering into the dim interior. Jean followed with precision, severing control panels that regulated the clamps. Coda reacted instantly. The restraints loosened enough for him to twist violently, the massive limbs snapping free, claws slicing through synthetic armor with terrifying efficiency. The apex's eyes met Rock's for a moment, and there was recognition there, a bond forged in peril, unspoken but absolute. Milo, wide-eyed and shaking, crawled toward the creature. Coda lowered his head, allowing the child to press against its chest. The roar softened to a rumble, a vibration that Elias felt in his bones, soothing both fear and fury. The scene was one of primal trust, human and predator, aligned against the forces that sought to destroy them both. The syndicate commander, a gleaming silhouette in advanced armor, activated a surge pulse, sending shards of energy toward Coda. The apex leapt, catching Milo midair with precise care, claws snapping downward on the pulse emitters, shattering them in a spray of sparks. Rock's team engaged the remaining troops, a flurry of bullets and explosives that turned the ship into chaos. Coda moved with purpose, targeting threats while shielding the boy, every strike calculated, every maneuver protective. Finally, the commander lunged, energy tridents aimed to disable. Coda met the attack head-on, muscles coiling like springs, jaws snapping in perfect timing. Rock intercepted, stabbing through the commander's plating as the creature used its weight to pin him. The syndicate officer collapsed in a tangle of sparks and smoke. The battle was over, but the silence that followed was not gentle. It was the heavy, charged quiet of survival. Rock, Elias, and Jean gathered around the apex and Milo. The child clung to Coda's scaled hide, still shaking but unharmed. Coda's chest heaved, glowing faintly under its natural bioluminescence, eyes softening as it recognized that the danger had passed. Elias knelt beside the child, brushing soot from his hair. "You're safe now," he whispered, though the words barely captured the enormity of what had occurred. The forest outside the gunship was quiet once more, the only sound the distant echo of retreating engines. Rock allowed himself a long breath, scanning his team. Scarred, battered, but alive. He met Elias's gaze, nodding in silent acknowledgement. "We did what needed to be done," he said. Jean adjusted his helmet, smirking despite the soot on his face. "And somehow the monster didn't kill a single one of us. Miracles still exist, Captain." Milo pressed his small hands against Koda's armored chest, and the apex responded with a low, almost purring vibration. Elias watched, realizing that what they had just witnessed was beyond any tactical advantage or contract value. This was something wholly different. A bond forged in mutual trust and survival, a reminder that strength was not measured in violence alone. The authorities would come, questions would be asked, and the syndicate would eventually learn of their failure. But for now, in the hushed forest, there was only the quiet companionship of human and predator. Rock's team would escort the child and the apex to safety, but he allowed himself a rare thought, one that hadn't surfaced in decades. Perhaps the galaxy was not entirely cruel. Perhaps in the quiet moments between survival and loss, there was room for something extraordinary to exist. Milo yawned, pressing his forehead against Koda's massive shoulder. The creature shifted slightly, wrapping a protective limb around the child. Elias glanced at Rock, who simply nodded. The apex predator had chosen to protect what was weakest and most vulnerable, yet it had done so with undeniable strength. And in that choice, Rock saw a reflection of what humanity could inspire: courage, compassion, and loyalty against impossible odds. As the sun began to rise, casting amber light over the canopy, the trio stood together, human, mercenary, and apex. The battlefield behind them was silent, and the path forward uncertain. Yet, for the first time in years, Rock felt something he hadn't allowed himself to imagine: hope. Milo smiled, Koda rumbled softly, and Rock whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "If this is what humans can awaken in the monsters of the galaxy, then perhaps we are not so small after all." The forest seemed to exhale with them, leaving behind the echoes of survival, and the unshakable truth that bonds forged in courage could transcend even the deadliest of instincts. They had won, not through conquest but through protection, trust, and the audacity to choose mercy in the face of absolute power. And as Koda padded beside them, its glowing eyes alert, Rock knew the story was far from over. But for now they were alive, together, and unbreakable.